All right, well, we have one action item for donations. We've received information from the DeVos Family Foundation for a donation in the amount of $224,000 to support additional training for classroom observation. And we've also received notice from Spartan Stores that they will be donating $20,000 to support Sibley Elementary, and that's almost become an annual donation for Spartan Stores to Sibley. So it is our recommendation that the board accept these donations.
Motion to move this forward to the board before we have discussion?
Move to the full, motion that we move these donations to the full board for acceptance.
Questions, discussion?
Do you need support?
Oh, support.
Support. Can you explain the DeVos Family Foundation donation?
That is actually an increase. Earlier, gosh, and I honestly think it was back in February, you approved the initial contract for Cambridge to come in and train staff on an observation program, and this is an extension.
And there's a correlated item in the purchasing agenda, is that correct?
Yes, yes, exactly.
So this
We
is
just,
training.
the original one didn't, there weren't enough funds and enough people to be able to pull it off, to do quality observation. So DeVos Family Foundation has agreed to increase the number of people that we're going to train to perform this.
Administrative staff then?
I'm not certain who the staff are, to be honest, Mr. Ross. I can certainly find that out for you.
No, I'm just curious. I mean, observation, I guess I thought of supervisory
I-
sort of deal.
I think so. I would believe that would be the case, but I can certainly find that information out for you.
Any other questions? I'll call the roll. Ms. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Dr. Bell? Yes. Motion passed.
Okay, under reports and updates, we're going to bypass the audit review for now. Second on the list was the financial statements for the month of September. September finds us about 25% of the way through the fiscal year and 7% of the way through the school year. We've collected 84% of our property taxes, so we're summer tax collection. And we don't receive a state aid payment in the month of September. The first one comes in October. We're also working through, on the revenue end, working through our approval process for our consolidated application, which has our large Title I grant in that. So at this time, we're still not able to request any funds for the 12-13 grant as we work through those questions that the state has for us.
Is that normal?
That is normal, unfortunately. It is. And they have changed consultants for us, and our consultant position is actually vacant. So I've been trying to work with the supervisor of those consultants and get him to kind of go through our application with us. So it is normal, though, even if when we do have an assigned one, it takes this long. I didn't know if you had an opportunity to review, if you had any questions on any of the activity.
Doesn't look like it, Shelley.
Okay. Next on the list is the purchasing agenda. We have several items on the agenda this month. Didn't know if you had any questions on any of those items in particular.
We're up in legal fees at $30,000 again. Increased legal fees last month.
Yep, we held several negotiation sessions in the month of September. As well, Clark Hill provided some legal work for an area requested by the board, and one other area that the purpose escapes me, but that was really, this is through the month of September, and I did try to plan out a little bit for any negotiation sessions that'll be forthcoming. And that is still, Mr. O'Connor, that we have not filled that position.
I know that Mr. O'Connor had requested before to see a sort of overall budget of our legal fees and, what areas they're going into. I'm wondering if that would be appropriate for this committee to look at some point in anticipation of, the new position that's coming up.
Sure.
So we can sense where the savings might occur with having an in-house and what we still need the services of an outside attorney, just to get a sense of the overall budget and where the money's going.
Okay. And are you wanting just a current year perspective?
I don't know. It might be helpful to do a multiple year because every year brings different needs, so we can kind of see. Your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, just like, depending on what has happened, I mean, whether it's a contract year or not a contract year, I know that has a significant impact on costs
You're right.
that we spend, so just so we can kind of make maybe a multi-year, maybe like a 3-year or something, just kind of
Okay.
see what it has been historically.
Okay.
Got a couple relatively minor questions about under the support materials.
Okay.
Well, I probably missed the comparents. The snowplow stuff, the ProCare landscape, and then under something else for food service. I guess it wouldn't necessarily be comparents. West Michigan janitorial. And I don't know. I just randomly decided to check locations, and I know we had a city sort of contract, or not city contract, but I guess preference for city contractors. And I noticed these two don't happen to be in Grand Rapids, and I don't know, so I just thought I would ask about that whole little city deal that we had talked about, and that policy we had passed regarding that. Like I would imagine ProCare landscape, I'd imagine that these other 3 are in the city, and I would imagine that we could have found someone else in the city. And for
Only
janitor,
the underlined ones are the ones that were,
say again.
the ones that are underlined are the ones that we have the contract with. The non-underlined ones are the ones that were people had bid but did not receive the contract.
Okay, so
So ProCare did not receive the contract.
okay, thank you. So then
And Twin Lake.
I think Mr. Finn can probably speak to
Export-
that.
Export did not respond to the bid, so these are the two people, Bob Snowplow and Twin Lakes,
okay,
the successful bidders. I can get a breakdown for that as to what has, but,
no, that's fine. I was just more
We-
curious.
believe it or not, we have a difficult time finding people who wanna plow snow for us.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
I thought about doing that as a side business myself,
We'll
actually.
take you to look for that business.
You'll have to recuse yourself from the
Yeah.
finance.
I did it for about 4 years.
Yeah, that's how I only thought
It'll get
about it.
old.
Can't be late for that, remember?
Yeah, no, that's why I only thought about it. I said getting up, but so the other one under section B, under other.
The number 2 for the West
Yeah.
Michigan janitorial. These positions have been in the past through PESG. We have struggled for fill rate to actually get these positions filled. And so we are,
So we privatized it, and we can't fill the position. Is that really what-
we're looking at other, we are looking at other options so that we can have our lunchrooms staffed. So West Michigan is on here as a means to try to get a better fill rate so that our lunchrooms are staffed appropriately for the school year.
So why is it, I mean, that seems like a pretty significant amount. Why is it that we have to contract it out versus having our own employees?
Cause they're 1 or 2 hour jobs.
Yeah, it was a move that was made 3-4 years ago, maybe, to go through PESG. And I'm guessing it was because it was a budget savings, because when you go through PESG, you're not having to pay the retirement costs for these positions. Even with the administrative fee, it is still less than the cost of retirement in FICA.
But these are part-time positions?
They are, like
Okay.
Ms. Geetson said, that they come in for an hour for breakfast
Right.
and 2 hours for lunch.
And maybe I'm generalizing, but my experience is that oftentimes these are staffed by our parents
Mhm.
as employees through the sponsored organization. So, in my mind, that's a win. And maybe that's only my experience, because I have a very
No,
small
that's
experience,
probably
but-
fairly accurate. I would say probably the vast majority are our parents that fill these positions. You know, and they're living closer to school, so that's nice because they can get there and then at those oddball 1 hour and 2 hour block times.
So it looks like, so then, what probably is occurring, is that we'll send interested parents to West Michigan, and they would apply there and.
That's
get
correct.
assigned to,
Yep.
Okay, well, just got my
What we
attention.
did with the
No.
ESG too.
Good question.
Any other questions regarding purchases?
No.
I will need to abstain from this
Yes.
because of Spectrum Health.
So I guess one other question about that West Michigan piece, so this is largely, a janitorial employment service of sorts then. And of course, I haven't looked to see what's in the city, if there's a similar organization in the city, but I thought that was, I guess, the point of that particular policy
And I think that the intent is we put the thing out there, if someone chooses
to reply.
then they have the ability to obtain the contractor preference. However, if it's not, if they don't take advantage of it, then it doesn't come into play.
So I should assume that we did put it out there then.
I would think so.
I would hope so. I've been surprised before though.
That will go.
So how does that work then? How was that word put out there that we were soliciting such a contract?
Well, you've already approved a contract with West Michigan Janitorial earlier to do some work. This is just an increase to the existing contract, but to help take on some of those new roles.
I can
Can
answer
you
that a
help
little
that a
bit.
little
With
better?
construction contracts, in the advertisement portion, we specifically have a paragraph that defines the local preference, response, and identifies that it will be in play, and gives direction on how to respond. So even when that goes to a plan house, and whether they look at the entire specification document or just the advertisement, they will see that notice that local preference policy is applied to this project.
Gotcha.
And just, I think West Michigan, even though it says West Michigan, I think their offices are located in the city of Grand Rapids. I'll verify their address, please, sir.
I don't know if that's just based off of the light research I did. It's internet searches said it was in Comstock Park. So I don't know. I guess the only other thing, Julie, I do get what you're saying in that we had a previous contract with West Michigan, and I don't know anything about West Michigan, but I guess I was just more so concerned about just maybe business as usual, for lack of a better phrase. Because we had a previous contract, that means we should keep that contract when there was an attempt to solidify relationships with businesses inside the city. So I don't know what that process would be to really put that out there, to let it be known that this was available. And it sounds like maybe we didn't put it out there based off the fact that we already had a relationship with West Michigan. I just don't know how appropriate that is. But obviously, that's probably easier for us just to continue with that. But so at this juncture, though, I'm assuming this is gonna take us through the rest of the school year. So there's probably not much to do about it at this point.
But what we could do is this spring, open it back up, and we could put something
don't know if there are any other options, but I guess,
It's just a means to try to get something to meet the need at the schools as quickly as possible so that we have appropriate staffing
for
for
this school
those
year,
lunch and
obviously,
breakfast.
there's
But
not much that could be done.
certainly we could look at it and I'll work with Fred and Mr. Baumgartner to get something out for bids for start for next school year.
Right, and I guess if I'm thinking about the policy and the intent of the policy, some of the definitions had to do with the percentage of employees that were also Grand Rapids residents. So if it's sort of a temping agency and the people that are being processed through them are parents or residents, so in some way that may meet the criteria as well.
It may, but I guess with the process being what it is, that criteria, I think you could have a double win. If there was a locally based business that did the same thing, then the employees would be locally based as well as the business itself. So, but yeah, I get what you're saying though. But like I said, for this school year, I definitely understand. I just want to make sure that we, like I said, in the springtime, we could at least put that out there.
Okay.
So,
Noted.
I guess I just want, since we're being filmed, appreciation from the Doug and Maria DeVos Foundation and Kellogg Foundation for their support with Cambridge. Seeing continued and extended support for that, and we can express it at the board meeting when we approve it, but it's fantastic to have partners and work with them.
All right, next on our agenda, I'm just going to keep going through and then we'll circle back to the audit review at the end.
Don't we have to vote to put purchasing agenda?
Do we?
I don't think so.
that just
No.
moves forward.
Nope, just moves forward. Warm, Safe, and Dry. Mr. Clomparens to provide us an update.
Warm, safe, and dry. The warm, safe, and dry updates in your packet. I did add a summary sheet so we could get and I'm not sure if this is what you were looking for, Ms. Keatson, but you wanted a summary on where we stood to budget. This includes overall to date. You can see we're under $3,000 variance from the budget of those items. If you look at the largest increase, the Ottawa Auditorium roof was significantly over our budget, and we'd had some others that were under. We will be addressing the contingency line items we have in the projects. We're starting to close them out, and these include all the full contingencies. So as we adjust those and don't spend that contingency, that will drop. So we're, based on the amount we've spent, and we've committed about $450,000 to date, we're within 3,000 of budget at this point. So we're pretty comfortable with the way our budgets were set up and versus what the projects are turning out to. We are bidding one other project currently, and that's the roof at SEAC, and hope that the weather holds and we get proper bids to get that done yet this fall. Otherwise, this is all we will do for now until after the transformation plan is approved and we know exactly which buildings we should focus on. We are going through with our fall inspections, and we will come back to this committee with a recommended and revised warm, safe, and dry program based on our inspections and the transformation plan with revised budgets and priorities.
Standing item on our agenda, and that's the legislative, and Mr. Helmholt couldn't be with us today, but just thought I would put out a reminder that the election is November 6th. So get to the polls, get in line, but remember to go out and vote, because there are a number of issues that will impact us as a school district, so. And now I'm going to swing back around to the audit review. I have with us Mr. Jeff Egberts and Ms. Katie Yang from our independent audit firm of Plant Moran.
Thank you.
And I apologize that they were delayed because I told them the incorrect time. So I erroneously told them 11:30, so.
Whole packet. It's a whole packet.
It's a whole
That
packet.
whole thing is a
Oh,
packet.
wow.
Yeah, there's three things in each.
Yeah, it's a whole packet.
I don't know.
You need it, Wes.
Oh,
I want you to do a lot of the work.
Do you want to say anything before I?
Yeah, I'll kick it off with a couple
Okay.
comments. Okay. Well, we appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning, so thank you for your time. We have recently wrapped up our audit procedures, and what you have in front of you is a draft copy of our report. It's still going through some final editing and some of the final stages of review, but we are here this morning to go through the draft with you. We'd like this to be interactive, so if you have questions, please ask as we go through the information. Julie is actually going to walk you through the financial statements, and we're going to spend more time this morning on the actual financial statements than we typically do in the full board meeting. At the full board meeting, which will be at next Monday, I believe, right? We'll spend most of our time kind of looking at a graphical recap of the financial results of the year, which tends to work better in that setting. But today we're going to go through more of the details. Before we get started, I just want to make a couple comments. And first of all, just to share with you that the audit again this year went very, very well, as it usually does. Your team did a fantastic job of getting through the close of the books and getting ready for us as auditors. We ask a lot of questions, we ask for a lot of documents, and it is a lot of work to close the year out, get the financial statements ready, and get through that audit process. So I think it's important for you to know that it did go well. The folks you have in the business office under Julie's leadership, and Rhonda's here today as well. Both of them did lots of work in this project, and it certainly from our standpoint went very, very well again. And I think as a finance committee and as a board, it's sort of important for you to know that things are going well in that regard, and you don't have auditors coming in fixing a lot of stuff and finding errors and mistakes. Related to the financial statements, and again, Julie's going to walk through them in detail, but the one thing I want to point out is that these are the financial statements of the district. They're not Plant Moran's financial statements. They're Grand Rapids Public Schools statements. You've engaged us, Plant Moran, as independent auditors to render an opinion on the statements. And if you look at the very first page behind the contents, that's where you'll find the audit opinion. And again, this year, the audit opinion is an unqualified opinion. You'll see it in the third paragraph where it states that the financial statements do fairly present in all material respects the financial results of the district. And that's paraphrasing what it says, but that is an unqualified opinion or a clean opinion. It's the highest level of audit opinion that you can receive. And in this case, in this instance, unqualified is a good thing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Julie.
Thank you. I just want to kind of walk through. I've got a bunch of tabs of things I would just like to highlight, and then I agree with Mr. Egberts is kind of have it interactive. So if you have questions along the way, or if, later on down the road you reflect and have some questions, then feel free to get a hold of me, and we'll get those answered for you. The first part of the statements, the management's discussion and analysis. So this kind of provides a narrative of where we're at in the district. And on page 3, the first part of the statements after this are what we call the district-wide financial statements. And this is more, the accounting that's used for this section is more of what's used in the private sector. So it's certainly not something that you're used to seeing monthly, as we just looked at our monthly financial statements. And it includes things such as the value of our buildings and our equipment in the asset area, as well as any of our future debt payments in the liabilities. So all of our voter-approved debt from the 2004 election, it would be reflected in the liability section there. And then I'd like to point out on page 8 of the discussion and analysis, this describes the difference between our original budget and then the final amended budget, and really purposes out why did we make some of those changes. And as you know, that throughout the year we receive changes both the state level and the federal level that can impact things such as our enrollment or revenue, such as enrollment, new grants, new state categoricals. And then on the expenditure side, we have changes because of enrollment as well, the need for additional staff, other needs for students, such as our students with IEPs, new grants, etc. I just wanted to point out, though, that we do amend the budget several times throughout the year as changes become known. Flip through my notes. All right. So then, right after the management's discussion and analysis, are the district-wide financial statements. So again, those are really more reflective of the private sector and can sometimes be a little bit confusing when you're looking at them. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that section. Again, if later on down the road you are looking through them and have questions, feel free to let me know what those questions are. The notes to the financial statements kind of provide an additional narrative, and those begin on page 26. So the notes provide a narrative, as I said, as well as some charts that further detail some of our financial information. And they typically cover areas such as how we account for all of the funds that we receive, how we deposit those funds, how they're invested, our receivables or funds that are owed to us, our capital assets such as our buildings, our land, our equipment, our vehicles, and our long-term debt. The notes also touch upon our risk management areas such as workers' comp and unemployment. And then we have a new note this year in regards to our sinking fund, or as we know, the warm, safe, and dry. All right, and then back on page 53 is where you start to get to some of the statements that you're a little bit more familiar with seeing. So on page 53, what you have is for our general fund. So that includes our general programs, our grants, and athletics. And it's a report of our original budget, our final budget, and then where we actually landed, as well as a variance column. This highlights both revenue and expenditures. So you can see we have a few variances. We work diligently throughout the year. Ms. Cribbs really tries to work with our county to make sure that they're updating our property tax value information with the state. And that is challenging in itself for them to get that updated for us so that we can accurately reflect our revenue and our budget. So I appreciate her work with that because that's a challenge in getting that updated. So if it's not updated in time for us to do our last budget amendment, you're going to see a variance between property taxes and state revenue.
You on caller ID? Do they know your number?
They might. They might. And then want to point out under the revenue, the other category of the local sources, we had quite a variance there. We had budgeted in the grants area for some projects that ended up being extended. A piece of that is the Blandford School construction, as well as there were several rather large donations for projects that are going on still at this point. So while we budgeted for them, we did not fully do that work, so the expense is not there, thus the revenue is not there for the grant side as well. On the federal sources side, just want to point out that variance where it looks like we came into a windfall sum of $4.3 million on the unrestricted side, and that is really that federal EduJobs money. We had budgeted that in a restricted category because that made sense to us, and that's where we thought it was supposed to be recorded. And then in further conversation with the state recently, that needed to be recorded as unrestricted. So it's budgeted there as restricted, but it's been recorded in the actual column as unrestricted. The next page is kind of the same picture, but for our special education center programs. And that is a self-balancing program. So whatever we bring in for state aid, any federal revenue, any state revenue, the difference between that and the final expenditures, we actually bill out in tuition to the districts who are participating, including ourselves. On page 60. And 59. I guess they're kind of together there. Just wanted to highlight, because we call it the Warm, Safe, and Dry funds. Technically, it's called a sinking fund, so I didn't want anybody to be thrown off. When you see sinking fund, that's what that's in reference to. It's to our Warm, Safe, and Dry money. Okay. Page, you don't, it's in the top there. On page 61, this reflects our non-major funds. So special revenue, which would be inclusive of our food service program, our RIF program, GRASP, as well as our Houseman and our community ed program, which is really running GED. That's what's included in the special revenue funds. Our debt service and our capital projects. Okay. On page 65, I'm probably getting some detail that's way up there. It's a look at our capital projects funds. So it looks a little bit different this year because you had authorized refunding of our certificates of participation, which were originally issued to put on an addition to Southwest Community Campus, or at that time it was so-called Franklin. So when we refunded those certificates and received actually general long-term bond debt, this is how we needed to record it. So the proceeds from issuance of bonds, those were the bonds that were issued for us to pay off the certificates. And then we'll be making semi-annual payments on that advanced debt. That refunding saved us about $650,000 over the next 2 years. So that was a great move. And we are receiving many calls, just as a side note, for the portion of our 2004 bonds that were issued. We had done a refunding on a part of it in 2007. Apparently the market's appearing to be ripe for refunding for the other part of it, with some potential additional savings for us. So I'm working right now on identifying how much that is, and we may be bringing something to you requesting another refunding and save some additional dollars for our taxpayers. And then beginning on page 67, this really breaks out our general fund between the general programs, the grants, and athletics. So you can see where our variances were, budget to actual, between those three components of the general fund. Just want to highlight a couple areas for the general programs. I'm on 60, mine's 67. Details of revenue, budget to actual, general fund, general programs. Is it the same one, Ms. Geetson? Okay. Under the state resources, or state sources rather, you'll notice the other category. We planned on receiving a little under $8 million, and we received about $8.4 million. And that was related to Medicaid payment that we received through the ISD. In the past, the ISD has held those funds, and as they've dispersed them, they've maintained a 20% reserve for future repayment. So as they were paying out all of the funds this year, they were even releasing the 20% reserved amount. And we had originally planned on keeping that 20% for not recording it as revenue, but after conversation with our auditing firm of Plant Moran, they thought it was best that we record that as revenue because in the last several years we have not really had to pay back any money. So there wasn't that liability there. So we'll monitor that and just to see if at any point in time.
From a 20% holdback to zero?
To zero. Mm-hmm. So now any future repayment will just have to come out of that, whatever current fiscal year will not come out of any type of funds that have been reserved.
Do we have any
Okay.
obligation to educating our parents on that repayment? Isn't that if they feel as though services rendered aren't sufficient to provide the services, that they can go after additional services, or am I thinking about something else?
I think you're thinking about something else.
What is the purpose of
But
the
I
holdback?
will get you. The purpose of the holdback is staff turns in information detailing the services that were provided to students. And if for some reason something was ineligible and they've paid us the money for it and it's the timing of us submitting it and receiving the funds and then it actually being reviewed at the federal level, if they found something that was not eligible, then they would come back to us to say, you owe us this money.
So having
past
zero-
practices showing that that's
That
not
hasn't
gonna
happened.
That's good to know.
It is good to know. And then again, you can see the EduJobs that I pointed out a few minutes ago under the federal sources section. Okay. Then when you get to page 70, does the same thing that we just looked at for revenue, but on the expenditure side. So the final budget, the final actual, and then any variance. And then the rest of the statements just show page 77 and 78. You can see our schedule of debt, so our debt service payments that are due from now till the year 2031. And the top also indicates when those payments are due. They're typically semi-annual, other than the 2001. And then on page 80, we highlight our trust funds. And the only new trust we received during this last fiscal year was the Myrtle Freeman Trust. And those funds were received to service Lincoln School. So that was a great, great donation for us to help those students.
Where are the particulars of these various trusts kept? Do you keep those?
They're held in the business office, so the actual trust documents are held,
And are the
and they're pretty.
principals of these various schools that these trusts are endowed for aware of the contingency of the trust?
They are actually, every spring, our office sends a letter out to the principals that whatever the stipulation is for the particular trust. So it's meant to give a $100 scholarship to both a male and a female that have an interest in French, for example, because I think there's one that's like that. We send out a communication to the schools that are impacted and let them know how much is available. Some of the trusts are what we call a non-expendable trust, and that means that we're only able to expend any interest that's earned, which these days is not a whole lot sometimes. And then the expendable trust funds are those that you can actually spend the original trust amount. But yes, we do communicate with the schools annually on what's available and what they can use it for. It's a 3 or
I
4
know
page
there's,
document that we send to them.
I know there's some people that have a practice of designating United Way funds, and there seems to be a gap of communication to the principals on
Okay.
designated United Way funds.
All
Or
right.
it's delayed, let me just say.
I will check in on that to make sure we have that process clear.
Because they have to go through several hands to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I think these must be listed every year in the financial report, these trusts, right?
They are.
Yeah.
They
I
are.
hadn't noticed them before. Got time for another discussion, I'm curious about some of these.
You'll have to give me some time to look them up. Some of the paper is old and yellow, and it's interesting what they have said in there
Yeah.
for what they wanted the
Voice
purpose.
concern and substantive and,
Yeah,
hear my heart, so I'm wondering how that sounds.
yeah.
Can you just educate me real quick, looking at page 80 and 81 on the difference, for example, non-expendable, the Mary Amberg Award. We got, 525, that first column, net assets.
Mhm.
Then you flip it over, and this is dealing with income amounts
It's
of
a
endowment.
non-expendable.
Yep.
Very much.
So it's the interest that's earned.
On the first,
So
the
page
interest,
80 is
the
the
income, that's the interest that's been earned.
the in, page 81. The
Interest
yes.
that's been earned,
Yep.
okay.
Exactly.
So, okay, so that 525 was just what the trust amount was on June 30th of 2011.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
33, okay, all right. Follow.
Okay. We do. I'll pull that out. Maybe we can bring that to the next finance committee meeting because I do have a little summary of what each of these are, and so that might be interesting for you to see.
Are these just in simple interest savings accounts? Is that how they're kept, or are they invested?
Nope. Some of them we invest. Some of the larger ones we invest and try to earn as much as we can, knowing that some of them aren't really going to be touched. So the non-expendable trust, you can really invest that out a little further to get a
But
higher
low
yield.
risk. Very low risk.
Yes. Yeah.
You're not out
No. No.
playing the stock market or something like
No.
this.
No. We follow our policy and what we're allowed to do. So we really do low risk right now. And really, there's nothing that's out there at all. We have savings accounts that are yielding more than anything else.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of our savings accounts are at 40 basis points right now, which is pretty good. But you have to go out quite a ways if you want anything around that in like a certificate of deposit.
Yeah.
It's not very good right now. And then I want to circle back to page 53. Sorry, I wanted to be able to walk through the whole thing and then come back to 53 so that you can see where we really landed with our general fund and our fund balance. So our final budget amendment, we had anticipated ending the year with a little over $18 million in fund balance. And we actually ended our fiscal year with a fund balance of $22 million.
Mostly attributable to enrollment, or?
Nope, there are 3 or 4 reasons why. One was the Medicaid, the $400,000 of Medicaid. Another reason was we had anticipated a settlement with a former employee, which we have not actually been able to, has not come to fruition. So that was about another $500,000. We know that we're usually off because of leaves, vacancies that happen kind of towards the end of the year, while we do the best that we can to project those out with that final budget amendment. We're really working on that final budget amendment beginning of April. So to capture some of those, sometimes as employees go on a leave or there's a vacated position, we're not able to grab those. As well, we are working through a better process to capture our costs for our health insurance and how we accrue those expenditures. So Ms. Cribbs and I are beginning to look through that so that we can get closer. But those are really the 4 main reasons why we were off. And with that, I don't know if you have any questions, or again, if you have them later on, and certainly anytime, but if there's anything that you feel that the rest of your colleagues would like to hear, and you've got something before Monday, I'd be happy to respond, and I can respond to all of you. So we will be delivering those financial statements. I think we've delivered them personally, but they will get them before, everybody will get them, the spiral bound before the meeting on Monday. And the last item on the agenda, and I apologize because I skipped it, went from warm, safe, and dry to legislative, is just an update on where we're at in the budget calendar. As you know, the beginning of the month, we had count day, which was great for us. We're still working through finalizing, but our count is coming in better than we had projected. We had anticipated losing 600 students, but we're going to come in significantly better than that. So as soon as we get a little bit closer to what that final number is, we will get that out to you, but it's a lot better, so, which is great news for our system. We appreciate that. Also on the calendar was this presentation, and then we're continuing to work through the transformation process for the district. So that was what we had on the schedule for October. Looking forward to November. Again, we'll be presenting these financials to the full board meeting on Monday, and then we'll be working through the transformation process for the system. So. Oh, shoot. Thank you. You gonna do federal?
There are 2 other things in your packet. So we went through the biggest one, the one that will take the most time to go through. But there's one that's entitled Federal Awards, and we don't need to scrub through all the details of it. But this is a summary of the special audit work that we're required to do on your federal awards. So if you look at page 12, just real quick, and the pages before page 12, sort of in a number of columns, but this is a listing of all the federally funded grants that GRPS receives during the year. And that column second from the right, the very bottom number, if you'll notice, is just shy of $55 million. That represents the amount of federally funded grant dollars that were spent and also conversely earned as revenue that flowed through the district in the June 2012 year. So a lot of money, and as I'm sure you're aware, all of these grants come with lots of rules and restrictions and compliance requirements that the district is required to handle appropriately in order to receive the grant. And so part of what we do in our audit testing is actually test some of the compliance features of those grants. And if you would flip to page 15 of that same report, This has a summary of auditor results. So if I were to walk in and you said, Jeff, I only have 1 minute and I need you to tell me how the audit went, this would be the page that I would direct your attention to, because it has both a summary of the audit results and the financial statements, as well as in the federal awards. And so in this case, you can see there are a bunch of yes or no boxes, and the no box is the one that's checked in each case. And that is a good thing. It means we didn't have any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, or findings in question costs, which would be listed on page 16 if we had any. So no findings in question costs, and no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses that we identified as a result of our audit of the federal award. So an outstanding result, and as I pointed out, you have lots of dollars and a lot of different grants with a lot of different requirements that the district is handling. So kudos to all the folks that are involved in that. Many times these rules and restrictions are difficult to understand, difficult to comply with. So it's not always the case that you get through an audit without having something. So great result.
I was going to ask, but I see down here that in addition to the sort of typical annual federal grants that we receive, that also included the SIG grants, the audit included the SIG grants. And
Yep.
They pick out major programs every year and do a little bit more extensive testing on those programs.
At the bottom of page 15 lists the particular programs that were identified as major during this past year, and there's a selection criteria that's dictated to us as auditors that we need to go through to pick and identify the programs that are major, and then those get some additional testing and additional scrutiny in the course of the audit. So
what is the Part D, Title I? What does that refer to?
That includes our institutions. So in this case, that was Bethany, Waucus, The Haven, and the Kent County Correctional Facility.
So I'm just curious, you said kind of the significant grants. Why would we just specifying Part D? It seems like that Title I is used for a lot more than just that. I'm just curious. But didn't you say significant? Is that what you said?
major.
Major.
So
Okay.
arguably they're all significant.
Major.
But it's a specific term and a specific selection process that we go through. So it's driven by dollars, it's driven by risk assessment, it's driven by how recently a given grant may have been covered in our audit in the past, and then also dollar thresholds. And there's also a dollar coverage that we have to achieve in the course of the audit. So typically it's 25% of the total dollars that we need to select grants that would cover at least that. If you're a low-risk auditee, which Grand Rapids Public Schools is, if we're not a low-risk auditee, then we'd have to cover at least 50% of the grant amounts in terms of major programs that we selected. So,
Mr. Ross, Title I Part A was a major program last year.
yes, yep.
So it kind of can go on, tend to go on a cycle. So you think of that, yes, that is a major program in our eyes. It's a significant amount of money. They do rotate them as much as they can.
Good question. The last thing that you have in your packet is a letter from us. It's entitled Report to the Board of Education. And there are two sections to this letter. The first one is captioned Results of the Audit. And this is on pages 2 through 4. It has a series of mandatory auditor to auditee post-audit communications. So auditing standards require that we as auditors communicate with, in the audit profession, it's called those charged with governance. So in a school district, that would be you folks as a finance committee and then also the full board. So it has a series of different things that we talk about, our responsibility under audit standards, what we're doing, the plan, scope, and timing of the audit, significant audit findings, difficulties encountered in the audit. If we had any, they'd be here. Corrected uncorrected misstatements, of which we didn't have any. Disagreements with management, if we had some, they'd be reported here. Unfortunately, we have nothing to report there. And other findings or issues, and in that section, we direct you to the report that we just covered on the A133 federal grant testing. So a lot of mandatory communication type items. Good thing is there's really nothing of note that we're reporting back. No errors that we found in the financial statements, no unrecorded adjustments, and things of that note. So good report, good result in that part of the letter. Second part of the letter is captioned informational, and it is exactly that. So in this part of the letter, we're just trying to sort of capture some things. Many of it is things that are happening at the state level that you're aware of. Some of it may be some things that you may not be aware of. So we tried to pull out some highlights that we thought would be important for you as a finance committee and a board to hear about. So first one, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks, but again, a reminder or a comment about how well your business office staff is doing. So we like to include that in the letter. Second comment is about fund balance. So I know that's a thing that you grapple with as you're doing your budget, and you make a lot of decisions revolving around where your fund balance is or where you project it to be. So we have some comments here about what happened in the past year with fund balance, as well as some comments about what we think you ought to do going forward in terms of looking at fund balance and some of the needs and the reasons for maintaining a healthy, good fund balance. I'm not going to take your time to read the entire letter to you. I encourage you to do it in your own time. I do have one other thing I'd like to point out, though, and that is toward the back of the report. It's on page 12. And I'm going to mention it because there's also a section in your financial statements on page 34 in the footnotes that talks about upcoming accounting standards. And there's one in particular that I wanted to mention because it will have an impact, and that's GASB 68. GASB is an acronym that we use for the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, which is the body that writes the rules for how governmental entities, including school districts, have to do their accounting. There is a new standard that will be effective for the June 30, 2015 fiscal year that will affect and will cause school districts as well as other governmental entities to record a liability related to pension costs. And as you're aware, the district participates in MIPSers. And so what this is going to do is for school districts to actually have a number on their full accrual. And as you remember when Julie went through the financial statements, we skipped over that a little bit because you don't really use that much or at all in terms of how you make decisions at the district. But there will be a liability on that full accrual financial statement, which will reflect the pro rata portion of that unfunded MIPSers liability. And so that's coming a couple years down the road. I think as it draws near to actual implementation, you'll start hearing a lot more about it. Certainly probably in some of the board things that you do, different meetings that you attend. I know the Michigan school business officials are having conversations about it, and I suspect as it gets closer to implementation, the news media will also be honing in on it and having some commentary about it. So I wanted to make you aware of it. It will likely be a fairly substantial number, but it's not just a Grand Rapids Schools thing. It's every school district, and in fact, every governmental body that has a pension plan will have this standard to implement. So.
So can you explain the rationale for making that change and how that will impact us?
So I'm not on that board, so I'd have to read into their minds behind what the rationale is. But I think it is similar to the rationale for the standard that originally came into play when you had to adopt these government-wide full accrual financial statements, which is a desire to have governmental entities have a little more transparency and be a little more analogous to what you might see in the private sector in a commercial kind of enterprise. So if you're running a for-profit business and you had an unfunded pension plan, there'd be a liability that would be on the balance sheet. And I think it's in part driven by the desire to have, again, more transparency around that issue and actually have some accounting and actually quantify these future promises to employees that have been made. So that's what I surmise was their logic and their reasoning.
And how will that impact us by accounting for this differently?
So the impact will be you'll have a liability that will be on that full accrual financial statement.
That people start asking about.
Yeah, And people will probably start asking about it. So right now, I think everybody knows that that's out there, and the real impact on an annual basis is the impact it has on the rate that you pay. So as a reminder, every covered employee, you're contributing into the system. That happens on an annual basis, and I think everybody is aware that there's this fairly large unfunded number that's out there that's in this MIPSR system, but it's never really been baked down to, gee, how much is any District X's pro rata share of that? And so this is actually going to be quantified for you. There'll be an actuarial calculation that'll happen, and somehow they'll communicate back to each of their participant districts as to what their actual share is. It will be a sizable number. I don't know exactly what it will be, but it will be substantial. And on that particular statement, that full accrual balance sheet, right now you have a positive net asset is the term that they use, which is sort of like fund balance in the funds. Your equity is called net assets in that statement. That number will undoubtedly be a negative number after implementing this statement. Right now it is positive.
That doesn't take effect till 2015.
Correct.
Will we be implementing that change prior to that?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's not my plan to implement early with it.
No reason
I don't
why
even
we're
know
not?
if we'll have the information to be able to do it,
Because you need the actual
because we need the
actuarial
actuarial, right?
calculation.
Right.
The only thing that I want to add to this, and not that it may or may not, but our financial statements are used for our ratings.
That's what I was wondering.
So there is the potential, although I think,
Comment on that.
yeah, I think that it's known when they rate us that we're a part of this pension program, there is this unfunded liability. There is, that is also out there.
Right. I don't work for a bonding agency, but my personal view on that is I believe that they are fully aware that this program exists and that there's an unfunded future obligation out there. And I highly doubt that the fact that this accounting standard is implemented is going to cause some new mea culpa on their part to say, oh, gee, we didn't know that this pension issue was out there. Now we have a different view about bond ratings. I believe it's fully baked in, would be my personal opinion for what it's worth, which is arguably not much, but.
It is part, when we go through a ratings review, and there's a series of questions that they ask us, and retirement does come up in those questions. So I would agree with Mr. Egberts, there's always the risk that they may turn around and use that against us, but they've known that this is out there.
It's hard to see as we expand public education to entities that don't have to pay into MIPSRs, how this many and continued ways in which it's not equal. And I would hate to see our ratings decline because of it, then our ability to borrow money
Yeah.
at a different rate be affected.
Right.
I hope that is part of the public discussion as we consider all the ways we're funding public schools and we're funding this commitment that we've made to the retirement system.
All right. And that is all we have.
Thank